Thank you very much, Maharaj, for joining today once again. Last two
Thank you for
podcasts have
having
been
me again.
last two podcasts have been very illuminating, and I thought today we could churn the scriptures a bit more and take some more specific themes from scripture and see how we can analyze them from a contemporary perspective, if that's okay with you.
Well, I'll let's see how it goes for me.
Yes, Maharaj.
I don't know. We'll play it by ear.
Yes, Maharaj. So we thought about the Dashawataras, which we felt that they are very prominent in the cultural iconography as well as in the spiritual significance of the spiritual significance in the tradition. So how does the modern or the contemporary mind approach them? How do we understand them? What are the various layers or levels at which they can be understood? So I thought we could discuss the pastime as it goes forward, and I can raise some questions and I can raise some points, and maybe you can also either respond to the questions or add your points.
Okay, but if you don't mind, I'd like to share a kind of schema which I find helpful for appreciating the Bhagavatam in general, because for us, those who follow the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we take the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavata Purana as our central final authority, based on what Jiva Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami, one of the famous 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan in the 16th century, wrote in his first part of his Shat Sandarbha, the Tattva Sandarbha. He discusses all the different Vedic literatures and points out what we might call the shortcomings. And then he does a process of kind of narrowing down to pinpoints the Srimad Bhagavata Purana, which is also called the Amala Purana, the Purana with no fault, as the perfect scripture. So some time ago, sometimes I like to make mind maps, making drawings with squares and circles and lines and so on. So I found myself making a kind of mind map for the Bhagavatam as a whole, which ended up being just a simple kind of standard form yantra, where you have a circle in the center, and maybe you have some like lotus leaves around the circle. There'll be some bindu in the center, and then there will be these sort of square sides, these gates, sort of north, south, east, and west,
Okay.
So I was thinking one way, obviously, Prabhupada said we should discuss Bhagavatam from all angles. So one angle for appreciating, I think, the Bhagavatam is we put the Bhagavatam in the center of this yantra. It's in the circle. And then what do we have on the 4 sides? Well, in my mind, I put on the bottom, so to say, the basis or the root, the Vedic literature, starting with Rig, Sama, Yajura, Tarva, Veda, all the scriptures, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and also including different Puranas. And of course, the Bhagavatam itself says Nigama Kalpataror Galitang Palam. It identifies itself as the fruit of the Nigama, that which goes down of the root. The tree is rooted in the Vedic Samhitas, and then it comes up.
Hmm.
And then jumping now to the upper side,
Just one
let's
minute, Maharaj.
maybe call it.
So when you use the word nigam, you're saying nigam, gum is to go down. So how is nigam connected with the Vedas? So I thought the word nigam itself refers to the Vedas, but you're saying
it comes to refer to Vedic literature in general, it seems.
No, so but then what is the significance of its moving down? So that
the idea of roots, the whole image we have is of a tree.
Okay.
Tree has roots.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
what goes down is the Vedic, and what comes up is the Bhagavatam, Kalpataru or Galitam Phalam. Oh,
right.
Okay, I didn't think of it that way. I just thought of Kalpataru as the whole desired tree, but it talks about roots and fruits. Beautiful. Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
Well, the point I want to make, but I'll get to that in a minute, is the Bhagavatam is very inclusive.
Okay.
Okay, so then on the northern side, the upper side, we have our own tradition, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, beginning with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then the text or the texts which he inspired, specifically all of the writings of the Goswamis, Krishnadas Kaviraj, Vrindavandas Thakur, and then going on to all the way up to the present with Srila Prabhupada and his commentary, translation and commentary to the Bhagavatam. And a major focal point in that upper area, we can say, is Chaitanya Charitamrita, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is what I like to call the ideal reader of the Bhagavatam.
Okay.
You get this in literary theory, the idea that an author is writing a book with some idea in mind of his or her ideal reader, someone who can really appreciate what they're writing. So the ideal reader in this case, we can say, is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is not, of course, just sitting and reading. He's living the Bhagavatam. He is there's the book Bhagavatam and the person Bhagavatam, and he is the primordial person Bhagavatam, being none other than Krishna himself. So he's hearing about himself. And then the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita is really can be read as an extended commentary on the Bhagavatam.
Extended commentary on the Bhagavatam. Okay. I think Prabhupada in the introduction of the Bhagavatam also puts in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Yes, he tells a whole biography summary. Yeah.
And Chaitanya Charitamrita is not just like a book of philosophy. It's more like a biography. It's more like a book of theology presented in the mode of a biography. So it's both, you can say in a sense that it's both the book Bhagavat and the teaching. It's like a book which is describing the person Bhagavat and the teachings of that person Bhagavat, which we could say is the book Bhagavat. So that's a beautiful way of looking at it. Yes. So that's the Nadan.
But you can also say that the Chaitanya Charitamrita is it's the boiled down essence. You know, the Bhagavatam is the fruit.
Okay.
The Galitam Palam.
Yeah.
And then when you take that ripe fruit, you can make a nice chutney.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah. I think Prabhupada also talked about a hierarchy, that Bhagavad Gita is like the undergraduate study, and then The Bhagavad Gita is school level, Bhagavatam is college level, and Chaitanya Charitamrita is doctorate level.
Postgraduate,
postgraduate level. So another way I have heard about this similar hierarchy is that the Bhagavad Gita talks about the identity of God. Who is God is identified in the Gita. Then the activity of God is talked about in the Bhagavatam. And the mentality or the heart of God, how God thinks, is depicted in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So of course we cannot make it
how
rigid.
God thinks and how God thinks and how God feels.
Oh yes. So yeah, mind includes both. Yeah, that's true. Yes, Maharaj.
Yeah. So all these things are relevant. So, but my point is, we're trying to picture now a sort of a yantra, and we have two sides now. We have all this Vedic literature on one side, and we have all the commentaries from our tradition on the other side. Then you may ask, so then what about the left side and the right side, the west and the east side? So my proposal, and it's just one way of thinking of the Bhagavatam, but on one side, I think of it as the east side. You could switch all these around, but on the east side, we have ourselves with our own reading experience and everything else, hearing from our gurus, the sadhus. We hear a lot of Bhagavatam classes, and we're also bringing everything with us that we have from our backgrounds. And okay, we can say, well, we're not interested in that. That's what we want to get purified from, and so on. Yes, but we're also individuals, and there's some relevance to our experience in that as we are reading the Bhagavatam, what is it that we take from the Bhagavatam for our lives that's important for us? And we're also communicating with others.
That's true. I think in your constructive theologizing paper, you mentioned this point that in a sense, every reader is at one level an interpreter, because every reader takes something from the scripture and then they apply it individually. So, so in that sense, it's true. This makes sense. And we have our intellectual worldview. There's so many things that have influenced us that shape how we look at the scriptures. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So we could say more about that, but let's continue with my yantra. What is it on the west side, the left side? This is the entire body of religious literature from other traditions which have any notion of God. And the reason I mention this, or why I include this, is because of one conversation Srila Prabhupada spoke. Well, it was the end of one of his lectures. It was in 1969, Los Angeles. At the end of a lecture, Prabhupada invited questions, and one unidentified lady asked Srila Prabhupada, what about Joan of Arc? Joan of Arc was a 15th century French woman who became a saint. She was a hero of the French. She was fighting against the British, against the English. And she became, I guess, canonized as a saint. So this lady asked Prabhupada, what about Joan of Arc? and she asked him, do you know who is Joan of Arc? And Prabhupada said, yes, I know. He was educated at Scottish Church College, so he would have known. And he said basically, yes, she is, this is also Bhagavatam. If it's connected with God consciousness, that is also Bhagavatam. Something like that, he said.
Yeah, I think Prabhupada said, sorry, please.
Prabhupada said that. He didn't elaborate at that time.
Yeah.
But to me, this is a very important clue to understand, to appreciate more deeply the Bhagavatam proper, so to say, the specific Sanskrit text, in the sense when Srila Prabhupada at least one time said, he gave as a translation of Srimad Bhagavatam, the title, he said, the beautiful story of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think Prabhupada said something similar about Saint Francis of Assisi. And Prabhupada heard that he talked about like sister wind and brother mountain and like basically like a sibling or a family relationship with nature. Prabhupada was very appreciative of that. And Prabhupada said that is also God consciousness. I don't know whether he used the word Bhagavatam in that context, but Prabhupada was quite appreciative.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we considering this as different ways of approaching the Bhagavatam? Say it's like the Vedic, Gaudiya, we could say theistic and individual. Are these different ways of looking at the Bhagavatam, or are these just different, means what is the yantra meant to convey?
For me, it's just opening up, yes, to look at the Bhagavatam from different angles. And each of these are, I want to say that they're all relevant for us to have a fuller experience of what the Bhagavatam is. And it helps us to understand or appreciate the Bhagavatam in a non-sectarian way.
Oh, okay, beautiful. So say if we want to consider the concept, the Bhagavatam's description of Krishna as the ultimate reality, then we could say, consider, okay, what is said about Krishna in the Bhagavatam, and then we see how that relates with the conception of divinity in the Vedic literature, or how that is elaborated on the Gaudiya tradition, or how that relates with other theistic traditions overall.
Right.
And then we could also approach it, okay, what do we think about it? What speaks to us? Or what?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And we can also, with regard to other religious or spiritual literature, it may be of value for communicating about the Bhagavatam to be aware of one cannot be knowledgeable about all the literature. That's a vast literature, but one can be knowledgeable of certain things and point out possible connections, possible comparisons. One devotee pointed out to me the other day, we have the story of Anti Brahmana in the 11th canto, and how he loses everything. He becomes completely destitute materially. And then how he goes from there. So there's a story in the Hebrew Bible, one of the books, it's called the Book of Job.
Book of Job,
And Job similarly loses everything. He becomes diseased. Everything goes wrong. And then, the question is he going to blame God for this or what? And eventually he hears directly from God, who tells him, basically kind of says, who do you think you are? You're just a little guy. You have no idea. You have no idea, who I am. But there's some comparison there. And there's been a huge amount of commentarial literature on the book of Job.
Yeah.
And some of that just might be interesting to consider with respect to the Bhagavatam, or with respect to this story like that.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is all, I've just, kind of roughly sketched this. I haven't developed it, but I think it can be useful.
Yes, man, this is very, it's at least visually very clear, and opens new vistas for us to analyze and discuss. So applying that,
to analyze, but also to
appreciate,
devotionally enter into, because that's what we really want, isn't it?
okay.
We want to devotionally enter into the Bhagavatam. I was just reading, there's a collection of excerpts of lectures by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur that's been translated from the Bengali to English. The book is called Srimad Bhagavat Tatparya. And I just read at one point, Siddhanta Thakur, Saraswati Thakur says, we cannot understand the Bhagavatam even after millions of lives.
My God, millions of lives.
Unless we he's saying unless we surrender to the Lord, we can.
Oh, okay.
But I think this helps us again, especially I'm thinking how to break through our tendency toward a kind of sectarian mentality, to help to connect for ourselves, to enter, but also to connect others with the Bhagavatam.
Yes, Maharaj. Okay, so now I was thinking of approaching this also not from such a visually clear pathway.
Yeah.
But I was thinking more that if we study the Bhagavatam, say we could discuss how, say, something like the, say, traditional and the academic perspectives of looking at something. So maybe more like if a rational way, if we look at it, what all could be the objections that come up from it, and then traditionally what are the focuses, what are the things that are learned from it, or what is, and what we could look at it from that way. So we could put that in this schema. In as individuals, we have certain questions that might come up, and as you said, we represent, we bring our intellectual, cultural, and various other influences into how we look at it. Yes, of course, and entering into it is it is relishable. So that's what we want to do, of course. And so now, should we start with Matsya Maharaj?
Yes, why not?
Yes, thank you. So now, the first question that comes up to a rational mind is, is this literal? That there is a small fish that becomes huge, and then there is always the, to the Western mind or to the modern mind, there is often the idea that there is this either anthropomorphism or zoomorphism, that there is this imagery of God in animals and things like that. So, so now
Teriomorphism.
Sorry?
Teriomorphism.
Terio is terrestrial forms in various.
No, terio means animals.
Oh, zoomorphism is also that, no? Or
maybe. Now I'm not so sure.
Okay.
Maybe both. Have to look it up.
Yeah, I just. Okay, theriomorphism, the identification of animal characteristics of supernatural being. Okay, and zoomorphism, at least I think that zoomorphism it refers not just to, I think it's not so much about uh, God. It can refer to anything which you attribute animal characteristics. So it's
right.
yeah. Okay. Yes, Maharaj. So now we know that Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Thakur, in a rough way, gave some kind of correlation between the Dashavataras and evolution at his time. He did not literally.
Was it Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur first, or was it Bhaktivinoda Thakur?
Oh, I read in Bhaktisiddhanta.
You might be right. I'm not sure now myself.
Yeah,
in any case, there is that. It's a kind of giving a kind of Darwinian spin, if you like.
Yeah, that's true. So
to the development of the avatars. Yeah.
Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I read your analysis of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's that essay on the Bhagavat, and it is very good essay. And I think that you talked, at least in that you analyze how he addresses three things. What are the obstacles that the contemporary mind might find? At first is the cosmology and the geography, coin history basically. Then the second is the ethics. Let's say Krishna dances with other women's wives and something like that, other men's wives. And then the whole theology aspect itself. So I don't remember this Darwinian spin being talked about over there.
No, I didn't mention it in that article in any case. I think the first of the three obstacles was just the difficulty of the Bhagavatam. It's difficult to read. It's difficult Sanskrit and so on.
Oh, okay.
And then was the difficulty of cosmology and so on, as you said, and then the difficulty of the ethics.
Yes.
So that was, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, of course, was acutely conscious of this tension with modern thinking, what he called Adunikavad. And the reason he was so conscious was because the social scene in which he found himself, because of his work as a district magistrate, was this sort of class of modern educated Bengalis that came to be known as the Bhadralok.
Yeah.
The good folks or something that were specifically trained by the British to take responsibilities for governance and so on. Yeah. And all these people, the zeitgeist, the mentality they had at the time was, forget about all this strange stories of Puranas. And of course, they were being very much influenced also by the Brahmo Samaj. The Brahmo Samaj of, what's his name? I'm forgetting at the moment. Yes, Ram Mohan, which in turn was influenced by the Unitarians of England, some of them who came to India. The Unitarians were a quite radical Christian group, and they were called Unitarians as opposed to Trinitarians. They rejected the idea of the Christian idea of the Trinity. And said, no, there is a singularity, there is one God, and Jesus is a great saint, no doubt, but he's not on the level with God. Anyway, so that influenced, this sort of chain of influences was there, which was leading his colleagues to reject Vedic literature in general, Puranic literature, in favor of, all kinds of Western writing and so on. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, "Hey, wait! Don't throw this away. You're rejecting the profound wisdom of the Bhagavatam." And that's because you are, he calls them shallow readers. They are shallow readers. They just read the surface and they don't go into the depth. Yeah, so
that's true.
So that was 1869. 1868, I think he gave the speech. I don't know, in 68, 69. It was one of the first things that he wrote as in the spirit of Vaishnava preaching.
Yeah.
And so my point is just this concern for how do we relate our literature, specifically the Bhagavatam, to modern thinking. That question goes back to at least that time. But we can go back even further if we like. There was one sort of lower level English judge in Calcutta in the late 18th century, Sir William Jones.
Oh, he was a pioneer of the study of Sanskrit, isn't it, in some ways?
He was, yeah. He was a pioneer of the modern the modern study called philology, the study of languages and their history.
Okay.
And he's the one credited with seeing the connection between Sanskrit and Latin, Greek, and so on. Anyway, he also founded the Royal Asiatic Society. But he also wrote several essays, and one essay he wrote, and this brings us to a more specific topic of Matsya. He wrote about Matsya in one essay, and his perspective as a good Christian was that...
Ark?
Huh?
Did he compare with the Noah of Ark? Something like
that? He made a comparison with the story of Noah and the Ark.
Oh.
But his perspective was that the story of Noah and the Ark is straight history.
Okay.
And the Bhagavatam is a distortion, a degradation of the original story, which he felt was what's found in the Bible.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, speaking of that story...
Just 1 minute, Maharaj, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about the Bhaktivinoda Thakur's addressing this tension. So in some ways, I think he redefines the terms Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama. I think he does that more in Krishna Samhita than in the Bhagavad essay. But I thought maybe that, if I understand this right, I thought that that could be a frame we could use over here. I think he talks about the literal, just those who insist on the reading everything literally as the Kanishta. And then he talks about, he places the most of the Bhadraloka thinking at the level of Madhyama. So he talks about more or less the rational people who want to look for some metaphorical meaning or who want to look for some ethical teachings or something like that in the Madhyama level. And in a sense, he's patting them on the back. Yes, you are better than literalists. But then he says there is a level higher also. And that is the Rasika or the transcendental level. So where it's more of developing devotion and experiencing rasa.
Yes.
So I think that is a frame we could also use for looking at the at the Dashavataras, isn't it?
Yes, that's good. Thank you for reminding me. It's been quite a while since I read that.
Yes,
Yes, that's useful. But anyway, going back to flood, there's there's flood literature all over the world. The world is flooded with flood stories.
Okay.
And that has led all kinds of researchers to try to understand why that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so there have been theories, archaeologists, paleontologists, geologists who are trying to see where have there been inundations in the past, or where can we see evidence of high water on what is now land, and so on. And you can see there are videos on YouTube with things about that. That's interesting. So the point is, there's an attempt to make some connection with what now in modern time we could call history, that there's some historical event happening, and then that is experienced or it's remembered over many generations. And then the memory after so many generations, so the reasoning goes, develops into a whole story. In the Old Testament, it comes as the story of Noah and the ark. In the Bhagavatam, it comes as the story of Satyavrata and Matsya and so on.
So Maharaj, there is a
Go ahead.
relatively influential contemporary thinker, Jordan Peterson.
Yes, he's all over the internet now, isn't he?
So he has done a series of talks on psychological significance of biblical tales or biblical stories. And it seems that his 2.5 hour lectures he gives, and he analyzes everything in quite an interesting way. And it seems that he's attracted even non-theists to start reading the Bible. He says this is not necessarily read it as a religious book, but it has various different ways in which you can look at it. So
yeah, I know he's been making that point, that the Bible is great literature. There are other scholars also. They say, if you really go into it, it's some of the best literature there ever was.
So now I don't remember everything that he says, but I had looked at his talk on the floods, and he gives a very interesting significance which could relate with what Matsya says. He says that basically there is an existential struggle between humanity and nature. That nature, we often in today's world we try to portray nature as good and human culture has destroyed nature, but it's not necessarily like that. That human culture is often simply an attempt to protect oneself from being destroyed by nature. There are floods and there are droughts and there are earthquakes. So there are times when nature overpowers human beings, and now that may happen because of human incompetence in the measures to defend oneself, or it could happen just because nature is extremely powerful. And at that time, when nature overpowers humans, then at that time humans need to turn to something bigger than themselves. And that intervention of something bigger than themselves, that happens by, if the humans will be able to access that, if they have prepared their heart for it. That means it says throughout your life, he doesn't bring God into the picture. And when he's asked whether you believe in God, he says the concept of God is so complex that I can't answer this question. but what he says is something where maybe it's a strategic position, because as soon as he brings in God, he will lose a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it could be philosophical also. It's just, but what he says is, throughout your life, whenever you have, at every major crossroads in your life, you can either choose to act virtuously, you can act according to your higher nature, or you can act according to your lower nature. And through each of these choices, you are preparing yourself. And if you have prepared yourself by acting responsibly, then at the time when this adversity breaks out, you will have the resources to access the higher nature. And then whatever it is you want to call the universe or something else, it will come to your help. So then he goes into the specifics of the story of Noah of Ark and how unlikely everything was that happened. That he was old and then he got a child and then he was told to go away and build a boat. And so he did all that. So that we can go into specifics later. But I thought this thing about humanity, nature, and then by regular good choices, one can access some power higher than oneself, or higher even than nature. That is an interesting schema which can be interesting or relevant.
Yeah, we might want to bring in the term samskara here. When we make a good choice, that is a kind of samskara, an imprint on our consciousness. It's a habit formation, if you like. And of course, this reaching for higher power, this is where the directions, the ways part of the theists and the non-theists, where the theists say there is not just a higher power, but a higher powerful, and the non-theist says, or the materialist, maybe I should say, says, well, then it's just your imagination. It's your projection. I think we talked about that before, projection and reception.
Yes.
So they say, well, that's just your projection, and therefore you're creating these stories.
But there's one thing also we could say that, science itself or the rational approach, at best, it can be non-theistic. We cannot rationally establish atheism as much as we can't rationally, conclusively establish theism. So we can say that we don't know enough. We don't know enough to be pessimistic about the existence of a higher power also.
That would be taking the humble position which the atheist could take advantage of and say, you don't know enough, but I know enough.
Yeah, that's possible. But I think Richard Dawkins also, when he made those buses, he had put some posters on the buses in UK. So what he had there probably is no God. Stop worrying and enjoy life. So, and he said probably because he said, I'm not like a irrational atheist. So he says, you can never know conclusively, but on a spectrum of existence of God and non-existence of God, so the unlikelihood of the existence of God is very high, likelihood is very low. That was his conclusion. But so
that was his conclusion.
Yeah.
Of course, Blaise Pascal had a different idea.
Yeah, that's true.
Pascal's wager.
Yeah.
I think he said it was pretty much 50-50, wasn't it?
Yeah, he said, and in fact, if you draw 4 quadrants, like God exists and you believe in him, God exists and you don't believe in him, God doesn't exist, and you believe in him, God doesn't exist and you don't believe in him. So he says that actually you won't lose. Because even if it doesn't exist and you believe in him, still you will have lived ethically and you would have lived in a way that is regulated and that will help you to be happy and help others to be, and you will be contributing to society. I think what has changed.
And ultimately no loss.
Yeah. But he says if God exists and you don't believe in him, there'll be a big loss. But what has changed, I think, since then is that there are so many more sensual ways of enjoying, and also the idea of religion leading to various kinds of extremism has come to the fore. So whether religion really helps people to live better, improve that question has become a little debated. Although overall, it does seem to be a positive influence, but quite often the negative influences of religion are much more portrayed in the media.
And so here may be the point where we want to sort of make a shift from using the language of religion to using the language of spirituality.
Okay.
Yes. Because it's, it's the popular idea now. I'm spiritual, but not religious. SBNR. It's an official category.
Yes, that's
in
true.
Some surveys. Which, of course, begs the question, what do you mean by spiritual? But what I like to say for that is, what I mean by spiritual is bhakti. And what is the Bhagavatam? And then within our Bhagavatam language, we can say dharma is kind of, we can equate with religion, religious. And then what does Sutta Goswami say? Savai pungsang paro dharmo yato bhakti radhokchaje. He gives as the highest religion as bhakti. And so he's speaking about the connection between religion and spirituality. But I think it's something to explore that it may help people to appreciate our tradition if we put a bit more emphasis on the notion of bhakti as spirituality,
yes,
maybe even in contrast to religion and dharma. And of course, what does Krishna say at the end of the Gita? Sarva dharman prityaja, mamekam sharanam raja. So that's lines up very well with saying, yes, I'm spiritual, but not religious.
Yes, Maharaj, that's true. One way.
And in relation back to Matsya.
Yeah, just 1 minute to apply this principle of spiritual and religious. One way I try to differentiate. Now, this is not a watertight differentiation, but when people talk about religious, they are talking more in terms of, say, dogmas and rituals. What you are supposed to believe and what you are supposed to go through and do, often mindlessly. And they see both of those as negative. Whereas when they talk about spiritual, they usually talk about either virtues or attitudes like forgiveness, gratitude, open-mindedness. And then they talk about experiences. If you're spiritual, you experience some sense of connectedness, some higher reality. And so those, if you look at the Bhagavatam is not so much about either dogmas or rituals. It is indeed more about the characteristics of sadhu are virtues, titikshava karunika, which is any spiritual but not religious kind of person will also appreciate those qualities.
Right.
And then the verse you quoted, it is an experience of God. That God. So in that sense, positioning bhakti as spiritual is. So often I say it's bhakti is spiritual and religious, but it's spiritual first, because we also have certain practices. But we could position that as spiritual and we could analyze it. Yes, Maharaj.
Yeah, you mentioned two aspects of religion that people don't like. I would say there's a third one, and that is institutionalization or institutions, organization. Especially in the West, everyone wants to be independent. They want to decide for themselves and so on. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing, but I wanted to get back to Matsya in relation to bhakti and say that one thing that strikes me about this narrative in the Bhagavatam is that Matsyavatar initially puts himself into a position of dependence on Satyavrata Muni. which means that the relationship, the rasa, we may say is a kind of vatsalya, where Satyavrata is protecting this poor little fish.
Yeah.
And of course, then the fish gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's some interesting comparisons to be made there. And eventually, the king realizes, oh, this could only be the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then he's offering his respects, and then of course, Matsya is now in the superior position, and it's kind of inversion, because now Matsya is protecting Satyavrata.
Yes.
It's also Vatsalya. As I remember, somewhere in the 7th canto, in speaking about Sri Prahlad Maharaj and Nrsingadev, if I remember correctly, Prabhupada mentions that Vatsalya rasa goes both ways, in the sense we generally think it means the feeling of being the Lord's guardian or protector, but it can also be the feeling of the devotee as being dependent on the Lord being the guardian.
Yeah.
But what's interesting in the Matsya story is that both are there. It's the same.
That's
it's
true.
the same. It's the same Lord. It's the same devotee, and the relationship gets switched around.
That's so true.
So I think that goes into the category you mentioned, Madhyama. That goes up now. Speaking about rasa, the Bhagavatam, this is now the ultimate platform where one relishes.
And this is also this beautiful frame that normally in the conventional religious path, we first approach God as the Father, as the protector. Oh Father, thou art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And then in some spiritual paths, we might evolve to a level where we see that God is dependent on us. So that would be the normal hierarchy, that God is our protector to we become our God's protector. But in this particular story, right, the hierarchy is inverted.
It's the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got in trouble once. Oh, go ahead.
No, you can say. I finished this point. Yeah.
No, you finish, please.
Oh, so no, I was going to make a different point. I just you mentioned something. You can mention. Yeah.
No, this is just a little interlude. Many years ago, I was giving a talk. It was a public lecture, a small. Maybe there were 30 people in the room here in Poland, and I was being a little bit derisive about this idea of praying to God for our daily bread. I was saying, because Prabhupada sometimes would say like that,
Yeah.
This is a very low level of religion. So I was kind of falsely imitating Srila Prabhupada. And, Poland is a very strongly Roman Catholic country.
Yeah.
And more strongly back then when I was speaking. So someone really objected when I said that. Said, this is, they were offended by that. So one has to be careful.
That's interesting. This happened with me in India also once, that I maybe also did something similar. I said that when you're praying to God for bread, it shows your love for bread, not love for God. So I put it like that, and then most devotees laughed at it. But then afterward, one devotee came and he said, I had brought a friend of mine. He's from a Christian background. He had come, why do you have to criticize Christianity? And then he said, actually, in their tradition, he was saying that they interpret bread in a very broad way. And he was saying that bread is what sustains our existence, not just physically, but in all ways. So that could be interpreted at different levels also. Yeah.
Right.
So, so yes, Maharaj. So now regarding this point of the rasa being inverted, so it's interesting that that this among the 10 Dashavataras, if we consider from the point of view of that, generally humanity turns towards divinity generally because something gets disrupted in the normal way of things. If we are just going through a normal life, okay, maybe there is some God and I will occasionally worship him, but we don't really turn our heart towards God. So it's only when some major disruption happens in our normal way of living, then we say, okay, I cannot cope with life as it is right now, and I need some higher intervention or some higher power. So that's when the wholehearted turning towards God comes up. Like, say, I say that it's sometimes like, for many people, God is like the spare wheel in their life, and in crisis, he becomes like the steering wheel. Then you take me where I want, what I should do. So it's one part of. So then,
the spare wheel.
Yeah. So
that's the first time I've heard that analogy.
Okay. Yeah, I believe it is a backup plan, but it's not of much interest to me right now. I'm not an atheist, but I don't want to be devoted to God.
Yeah.
So, among the Bhagavatam various avataras, if we consider I think it's a Greek category to categorization of evil as natural evil and what is it? Human evil, or it talks about how nature might bring problems upon us, or people might do bad things and problems might come upon us.
Right.
In the Bhagavatam, this is the only pastime where the adversity that is coming, there is no conscious agent behind it. Otherwise, each pastime we have some demon. We have Hiranyaksha, we have Hiranyakashipu, we have Ravan and everyone else. Now, of course, in the case of Kalki, there is not one. It said many demons are there. Or the kings in general had become demoniac. Parshuram also, there is one Kartavir Arjuna. But it seems that in this case, the evil is not presented as one person. It's just nature is, the cause of that flood is not mentioned. It's just that flood comes, or the devastation comes.
because it's time for it to come. It's the time for pralaya.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So time
this idea you mentioned, there's no, regarding nature in the Bhagavatam, I did a presentation on this many years ago at the World Sanskrit Conference. Well, that's a whole nother subject, but no, I'm sorry, this was something else. I did something on humor in the Bhagavatam. Nature in the Bhagavatam, I wrote an article. Basically, up to 10th canto, nature is attractive and dangerous.
Okay.
It's attractive. It's the best example is Gajendra entering into this beautiful pool, to enjoy with his wives, and then the crocodile comes. So that's and it's describing that lake. It's a very beautiful place. So nature is beautiful, it's attractive and dangerous. And of course, this equates, or it ties into the Bhagavatam's general presentation, again, up to the 10th canto, of the feminine, of women in relation to men who are pursuing spiritual life. In other words, they're attractive and they're dangerous.
Yeah, that's striking. It's parallel. So although Maya is, although you could say Maya is energy, it's not necessarily equal to women. Maya can come in many forms, and Bhagavatam also says for women, man can be Maya. but still you're talking about overall portrayal of nature and portrayal of women. Yeah, that is true. And it's interesting when you talk about attractive and dangerous. If we consider the fourth canto, Prithu Maharaj pastime, there its nature is, the earth is portrayed as a cow, and cow is even not just sensually attractive, but it is, because it's religiously attractive. Yet it is not giving the food, and in that sense it is harmful. So it's not so much temptation over there, but it's more in the form of tribulation that is coming.
Yeah, although, yes, the cow is, of course, a kind of, in one sense, a kind of different tattva, somewhere between nature and humanity, as I see it, the way it's represented in that particular place, and maybe also in the first canto with Maharaj Parikshit.
Yes.
I have to think about it, but from what I was reading in preparing to write my book on cows, this struck me very much. Cows, and I met people also when I was doing my interviewing in India for this book, people who were champions of cow protection. They would say, cow is not an animal.
Oh, okay. Cow
is something more than cow is divinity. They always like to quote that the cow embodies all of the demigods and so on.
Okay. So I think maybe that's a big subject, and that's interesting.
That's another subject.
Yeah, I would love to discuss that. Maybe it will come in one of the avatars if we get to them. Yeah, but it's fine. So then this idea that in each of the avatars, there is some kind of disruption of normal life. And Krishna also says that when dharmasya glani happens, that's when I descend.
Yes.
So now there is, prior to this, so I was just trying to place this in a broader framework, that is there much description of Satyavrat? Obviously it seems that after, when he starts offering prayers and everything, he recognizes this is the Supreme Lord. So he is a devotee. But is there any further description of him? You're talking earlier about the dependence. So when that fish came, he could easily have neglected that fish, but he gave protection. So that also indicates his compassionate, or at least considerate nature. And then he went out of his way because the fish was becoming bigger and bigger, and he had to make arrangements for it. And he kept doing that. And eventually, then because in a sense, he went through all the trouble to try to protect the fish, and then the fish protected him. So,
so there must be some bhakti already there.
Yeah, that's true.
But there's also, I'm just thinking aloud here, and trying to make a little possible connection to the prophetic traditions. Sometimes the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions are sort of put together. Sometimes they're called simply Abrahamic traditions because they all kind of stem from Abraham. But also they're called the prophetic traditions because there's a pattern that God chooses someone to be his representative despite that person's lack of qualifications, and even despite resisting to take that position, that duty. And so I'm wondering here if Matsya is, in a sense, choosing Satyavrata.
Okay. That's interesting.
But of course, there's another interesting element here we don't usually talk about, but we have the idea of a little fish speaking. First of all, we don't usually think of fish speaking And it seems we have a fish that's not only speaking, but speaking perfect Sanskrit.
Yes, that's true.
To which we may say, well, of course, if he's God, what else would you expect? Certainly he's going to. But Satyavrata, hearing a little fish speaking Sanskrit, might be wondering, what's going on here?
Yeah. There is this um, there is this whole idea that, maybe that people in the past, they were not as rational as they were, and that's why they believed all kinds of stories. But now we are rational, and we we don't believe this. We are skeptical about these things. That is one idea. But then when I'm asked this question, I say that we see rationality even in the Bhagavatam. Say, for example, when Krishna lifts Govardhan hill, at that time, after the Brajvasis asked, and there's a whole chapter, the Brajvasis asking, how could Krishna lift it?
Yeah.
And then when he says that, actually, I was told that Gargamuni had told that he is as good as Narayan. Gargamuni doesn't exactly say that he's Narayan, but something says like that. He's empowered by Narayan, he's as good as Narayan. And the Brajvasis accept it. So that means that they are not naive to accept any story. They also know that there is a rational order to the world. But they're open to recognizing that this rational order can be superseded by certain higher powers.
Super rational.
Yeah, super rational, yes.
Yeah.
So in that sense, now there are some cases where even ordinary animals seem to be speaking. Like Gajendra is composing prayers in Sanskrit. And we have the Vanaras speaking in the Ramayana. So in some ways, the modern approach is that the Mahabharata seems to be much more believable because it doesn't have things like talking animals and stuff like that.
Yes.
But the Vanaras also are said to be an evolved species. Sometimes they're compared to monkeys, but they are said to be like almost celestial kind of apes. So maybe they have...
well, there's a whole debate I remember reading among the scholars of the Ramayana. What actually means Vanara? What is a Vanara? It's not exactly, they are very they don't want to just say, oh, it's a monkey. No, there must be something more than that.
I think the etymology also means Vanara. Is this a human? Because they very strikingly resemble humans.
Well, okay, maybe. That's called folk etymology. That's something. Yeah, that's something that would very quickly be dismissed by a standard scholar. But they're a lot of fun, these folk etymologies.
Okay, interesting. So folk etymology is also something which is sometimes used by our tradition. I think the word asura is also used in that sense sometimes. That no, I think the original is ashura, that one who enjoys in the body that which breathes.
Again, folk etymology.
That is also folk etymology. Okay.
Yeah, one who enjoys it's generally understood that the word asura comes from Persian, asura Mazda.
Oh, okay.
Where for them, the devas, for the Persian civilization, it was asura were the devas. And then, for south of or southwest, in other words, in present day India, they put it the other way around. All of this is certainly speculative. We can't say, but there is pretty commonly that connection made, as far as I remember.
Okay.
Asura with Persian.
Yeah, okay. Maybe 2-3 quick points I'll mention. So one is that the idea of talking animals doesn't seem to startle anyone in the scriptures, as far as we see. So
right.
it's that, okay, they're talking. So there could be, it seems that the boundaries between either various species or various levels of reality, like the celestial and the terrestrial and the celestial, or between the human and the animals, these boundaries are not that rigid. They seem to be somewhat porous. And animals have human attributes. The gods interact with
Yeah.
humans. So that seems to be overall characteristic of that universe itself. And yeah, yes, Maharaj. So
I think some people would say that this is an indication of the continuing degradation of our consciousness. The fact that we cannot generally communicate with other species, whereas possibly in earlier times it would have been somewhat normal. And we do meet people who claim and go into quite some detail about how they do communicate with certain animals.
yeah, there are horse whisperers.
We have,
Yes, sorry.
yeah, I was just going to say, we have a devotee here in Poland. She's a fairly quite well-known trainer of horses by a special method of nonviolent training, and she communicates with her horses.
Oh, okay.
Horse whispering.
Yeah, that's true. And it seems, I think, among the 64 qualities of Krishna is to speak in all languages, including the languages of the animals.
Yes.
So it seems
for
that,
Krishna, no problem.
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, not only for it's Krishna, but if you see the remaining list of qualities, which is described what he learns in, I think, is this a list of the 64 qualities in the NOD, or is this one of the skills he learns in the Gurukul of Sandipani Muni?
Oh, I guess I always thought they're the same, but
they could be different. But I thought if it's in the Gurukul list, then it means that that was a skill that could be learned at that time.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, that it's a degradation of consciousness, that's one very striking way of looking at it. Yeah. And then yes, ma'am.
But then you would wonder, I would wonder, is Krishna speaking with the cows in Vrindavan?
Krishna does have names for them.
He has names, he calls them, but does he speak with them?
That's a good question. They are more receptions of affection rather than, say, reciprocators in conversation or something like that.
It seems so, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Even the monkeys, he doesn't really talk with them. They are there to create fun.
They're there, and he just gives them butter and yogurt.
Yeah. So now, even if he equates, say, sometimes it's said that it was Ram's monkeys. Ram couldn't do anything for them because he was poverty-stricken. He was exiled. So now Krishna is returning the favor in this avatar.
Now he's making up for it.
Yeah. But Ram talks with the monkeys and Krishna doesn't. That's interesting.
But
then there is also that story. There is that story of Shara and Shuka. They're both talking about Radha and Krishna's glories. And
Shuka and Shara are speaking. Yeah.
They are parrots?
But they're parrots.
Okay.
Parrots are talking.
That's true. That's true. Interesting.
Although parrots are usually just parroting. They're usually just repeating what they hear.
Yeah. So there are two more points I had with the Matsya avatar. See, one is Bhagavatam begins with the question that this fish, why would Jugupsitam, something like that? Then why would this Vishnu appear in such a low form? So so now I had this question that in in the hierarchy of or in the 8.4 billion species that are talked about, it seems fish are placed even below the trees. It says Jalaja Navlakshani Sthavara Vimshati. So like that it goes. So, and that is sometimes used as a rationalization by some people that you can eat fish also. Because
oh, I see. I never heard that before. Okay.
So it's interesting that Bhagavatam describes that that in that hierarchy, which is the lowest species, the first manifestation among the Dashawataras is in that species, and that
yes.
That indicates in some ways the inclusiveness that that everything is everyone is a part of the divine, and the divine can manifest anywhere or any form.
Yes, and also one can take the idea here that God is ready to humble himself to the so-called lowest form, which simultaneously, of course, elevates that form, because if God is taking that form, actually that must be a very glorious thing, glorious form.
Yeah.
In other words, if we were to experience, how to say in a more graphic way, anyway, God appears in the form of a fish, and everyone recognizes, oh, this is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's a fish. Then naturally we're going to look around at other fish and think, well, I guess they're not so lowly after all.
Yeah, that's interesting. Often, in some ways, the bhakti tradition challenges existing hierarchies. Like many of the devotees are born in lower classes, but this is an example of even God appearing in a lower species.
Yes.
Yeah, that's...
He's we may use the word condescend. The Lord descends, and he condescends to enter such a humble form, because he's, of course, also teaching humility.
Yeah. So here you're using condescend not in the negative sense of being a condescending towards someone. It's rather just
right
in the sense of accommodating or including. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then another point is that later on, when you talk about the rescue, it seems if we compare it with the Noah of Ark, the Noah's Ark, basically, there is no such thing as a fish. It's just the ship that is built very big, and special species are included in that. Whereas here, it's more of human effort guided by some divine instruction, that in their case, which saves from calamity. But here it is not so much human effort. I don't think there's any description of Satyavrat having to build any ship or anything like that.
No, he doesn't have to build a ship. He says, Matsya says, a ship will come.
Yeah.
It's already built.
Yeah. And then, so the ship is there, and it seems that the ship is held to the snout of Matsya. So that you could say the intervention of the divinity is much more over here, a much more active presence in rescuing humanity.
Yeah, there's a definite visible presence.
Yeah. So now, is there any significance that says Noah is said to be like a significant progenitor, and there is a recreation or rejuvenation of species from there? So is there something like that for Satyavrat Muni also?
I don't remember there being any such reference. Yeah. And it's a bit curious because you don't get a sense, it's like in Noah's story where there's kind of two copies from each species in order to preserve them and, reproduce. With Satyavrata, it seems like it's just Satyavrata, and I don't know, is there someone else? But, but he is, of course, Manu. And the general idea is he's carrying over to the next period of time, the next kalpa. So there's a sense, I think, of Matsya serving the purpose of continuity of creation.
Oh, okay.
One of the jobs of Vishnu is, or the central job of Vishnu is maintenance. Yeah. So he's maintaining the creation, and but the creation gets destroyed every night of Brahma.
Hmm.
And so something has to be done to carry over to the next creation. That seems to be suggested, but it's not very explicit.
So whether the danger was to Satyavrat Muni himself or to, and Satyavrat is called a Muni, but is he also a king? Is like a Raja Rishi, or is he a renounced sage? Seems to be more like a king, isn't it?
He's a king who's also very austere, because the reason he comes to the side of the sea where he meets the fish is that he's been fasting and meditating, I guess, on the bank of this sagara or sea or whatever it is. I don't remember. So he's an austere king, but he's also Manu, or he's going to become Manu.
Yeah.
And Manus are, I guess that's the Kshatriya category, isn't it?
Yes, Maharaj. And, at that second level of metaphorical or something, I was thinking that this also applies to how God can manifest in the unlikeliest of ways, even like a inconspicuous way, and then he expands. So Prabhupada came to America by the date yesterday itself. So Prabhupada's visit to America began with a very inconspicuous. He met somebody and he said, "Oh, I have a son there and he will sponsor you." And then Prabhupada talked with him and Prabhupada forgot about it completely. Prabhupada did respond. He gave his information. And then Prabhupada went from place to place, and it seemed that this Mr. Agarwal talked with his son, and his son sponsored. He had done it off with many other sadhus, and he thought nobody is going to come. But then the mail came to Prabhupada, and then that whole opportunity,
and it opened up
and became bigger and bigger and bigger. So
yes, Matsya. This is, well, it's not the proper application of Matsya Nyaya, but it's a different kind of Matsya Nyaya.
Yeah. So that is something which you can say carry home. That Krishna can appear in the most unlikeliest of ways. Prabhupada could easily have overlooked. Okay, he's just so many people talk about it. Nobody will do anything. And Satyavrat could also have overlooked this fish. But then that proactiveness, and then that resourcefulness, responsiveness, and then that opened such a big door. So now the Krishna consciousness movement is like like Matsya just almost spread all over the universe, not all over the world at least.
Yeah, and this brings us back to the rasa dimension, because this is wonder. This is adbhuta. So Matsya, his expansion is something. The whole pastime, all the pastimes of Krishna are wonderful in the sense of being amazing and inconceivable and so on. So this expansion of divine presence, we can say, is we can experience the wonder of that with especially with the Bhagavatam.
Yeah, that's true. And just while you're talking, it struck me that in one sense, initially it was Prabhupada who took care of ISKCON. ISKCON was dependent on him. In a sense, it's always, but he was taking care of individual devotees, their health, and even feeding them. And then eventually in his final days, there were devotees around him, taking care of him, speaking the Krishna Kirtan and Krishna Katha to him. So it's also in a sense that inversion of hierarchy. Satyavrat took care of Matsya, and then Matsya took care of Satyavrat. Yeah. Yes, Maharaj.
Very nice.
Yes, Maharaj. So can I quickly summarize, Maharaj, in 2
So,
if you don't mind?
Yes, please.
So it was a very broad-ranging discussion. And so we started by talking about how we can appreciate the Bhagavatam, especially the Dashavatara. So you talked about the Yantra, 4 perspectives, that the Vedic perspective, how the Bhagavatam is the ripened fruit. Then the Gaudiya perspective, how our acharyas elaborated on it. Then we could talk about the religious or spiritual perspective, how we can see from various traditions. And then we are individual seekers, and we bring our own conceptions and our own thought process to it. So these are different ways we could appreciate. Then we talked about how in our tradition, so in some ways our discussion went that way. In our tradition, we look at how Bhakti Thakur has equated this with in some way with the Dashavatara. It's more of a correlation rather than an equation. Then Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about various levels. So literal, metaphorical, and then rasic, or aesthetic. So then there I talked about, you also mentioned about from the other religious perspective, for Prabhupada correlated for Joan of Arc and St. Francis of Assisi, that they also seem to be great saints, and it's the Bhagavad. And there is this correlation in between Matsya and the Noah's Ark, where there are some significances, some similarities, that at least a boat is there and there's a flood. So, and I mentioned about how there seems to be this, that nature sometimes overwhelms humanity, and that's when humanity seeks something higher. And you mentioned in the Bhagavatam, nature is shown as both attractive and dangerous, and that parallels the depiction of women also in the Bhagavatam. And then there is the idea of human choices or human good choices that come through samskaras that can prepare humans to access the divine when the divine intervenes, or when nature overpowers and one needs the divine. Then we talked about, with the Matsya avatar itself, we went into the pastime, how he grows enormously, and there is the inversion of Vatsalya Rasa. At first he is protected, and then he protects. And this is somewhat this is we could say the opposite of the way normal God consciousness may go, that God is our protector, and then some devotees, they perceive him as their protector, as being the protector of God. And then specifically with respect to Matsya avatar, he discussed 2-3 points about how, because fish is considered the lowest, but Krishna appeared in that lowest species to help us see that species as sacred. And then we talked about talking animals, how they don't seem to startle anyone. So it seems that either the Vedic, it's not that people were irrational, but they were open for super rational, for explanations about rationality which are beyond our paradigms, or contemporary paradigms of what rationality means. There are higher powers intervening. And then you mentioned that talking animals is also talking with animals is a feature of, say, Krishna's omnipotence and or Krishna's training, whichever. And the inability to talk with animals could convey the degradation of human consciousness. That because human consciousness is not that broad or receptive, so we can perceive only our level of reality, not the celestial level, nor even the animal level. And then toward the end, discussed about how the Matsya, he appears in a small form and expands. So like that, God can manifest in a diminutive or inconspicuous form. That's what happened to Prabhupada. A small opportunity to go to the West by just a casual suggestion from someone. But from that, the Krishna consciousness movement has manifested and expanded. And this is a source of wonder. So which is that rasa, the Bhagavatam ultimately entered into through rasa. And we can appreciate how, just as Prabhupada sheltered ISKCON, and Prabhupada was, in a sense, sheltered by ISKCON's final days, just like Satyavrata Muni was. So, did I leave out any points, or you want to add something, Maharaj, as conclusion?
No, I'm just impressed with your sharp memory. You've remembered all these points. You didn't make any notes.
Yes, Maharaj.
Very good. So this was Matsya.
Yes, Maharaj.
So shall we talk about next time? Shall we talk about Kurma Avatar?
Yes, Maharaj, that will be wonderful. This was very stimulating. And I think we also laid a lot of groundwork in today's session. So we could make further progress and maybe faster progress also. But we'll see that naturally at what pace it goes. Thank you very much.
We can go at any speed.
Yeah, whatever works naturally, whatever evokes rasa, or whatever, however the discussion goes. Yes, Maharaj.
Exactly. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time and very devotional and intellectually stimulating discussion. Humble obeisance.
Thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Krishna Kshetra Maharaj ki jai. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.